You?
I'm doing so great. You can't see me at the moment yet, right?
Not yet.
All right. I've got some camera issues, last minute technical things going on here. Just give me 1 second and we'll get this started. If you are just joining and you're watching us live, go ahead and just type in the chat where you are watching from, and we are about to get started. We're going to be talking to Garrett here. How do I pronounce your last name? I want to make sure I get it right.
Salpeter.
Salpeter, I love it. And Garrett Salpeter is an engineer and neuroscientist who's been on a quest to push the limits of human recovery and fitness, and we're going to be talking about all of that today. And you're a former college hockey player, I think. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Do you have hockey in Australia?
We have running water and electricity as well. It's incredible. If you can't see me right now, don't worry. I'm just sorting this out in the background. But Garrett, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself, a little bit about you and what you do while I'm sorting out my my technical issues here.
Absolutely. Garrett Salpeter, founder of NeuFit, and we often work with people who are trying to recover from injury or from surgery, or trying to reverse chronic pain. And by working with the nervous system and using some unique technology that we have, we're often able to help people recover much faster than they would with more traditional methods of physical therapy and other traditional therapies. And it's based on the nervous system, because that is the control system of the body. And so that's, in the name of our business is NeuFit. We put it right there, the neurological. So we work there, and then also often help people recover as they, or progress as they recover from injuries and overcome pain. Then we're able to also use this technology and the same type of approaches to help them build a long-term sustainable fitness program. So there's a whole rehab and training system.
Got it. And as I understand it, you deal with elite athletes and entrepreneurs in pain management more specifically, right? So people come to you, they've got pain.
Yes.
How do you help them alleviate that pain? Because let me just give you some context. I experience lower back pain, and I have done for some years now. And I suspect it's because I have tight glutes and tight hamstrings, and that puts a lot of pressure on my hip area and my hip flexors and around that area, which causes the lower back pain. I'm told reliably that if I have lower back pain, it's not really an issue to do with your lower back, even though that's where the pain is. It's often something to do with hamstrings and glutes. Is that your understanding, or how would you treat something like that?
That's a great question, and there's two parts to the pain conversation. One is the physical component, and then the other is, sometimes when you're talking about pain, there is a psycho-emotional component that we can't ignore, and I'll talk more about that later. But in the physical component, it is common that there's glute and hamstring dysfunction that does cause the lower back to become susceptible. If you're not supporting or stabilizing with those muscles, you end up collapsing into other areas, and that can lead to issues in the lower back. However, we also find that it's often many other issues, and oftentimes people will come and see us with low back pain, and we test their glutes and hamstrings, and they're fine, and it's something in the psoas or the adductors or the glute medius instead of the glute maximus, or it's something else. Sometimes it's muscles in the lower back itself. And so one of the things that we do, we got to work together. I think it was Paleo FX or something. We did that scanning. It was your foot, right? We did. Yeah. I think so. One of the things that we're able to do with our machine is actually scan around on the body and find exactly where those underlying dysfunctions are, so that we're not guessing anymore. Because sometimes it is the glutes and hamstrings, sometimes it's something else, and we got to be able to figure out what the underlying cause really is.
If you're just joining, welcome. Go ahead and just post in the comments where you are watching from. We've got Stephen who's watching from Sacramento in California. Hello, Stephen. Nice to see you here. Welcome to Swanwick Live. I am your host, James Swanwick, and today we're speaking to Garrett Salpeter, who is the founder and CEO of NeuFit. And Garrett's known as the health engineer, and he's taken his training in engineering and neuroscience and used it to create NeuFit, that's NEUBIE, Fit and his patented NEUBIE device. He trains doctors and therapists and professional sports teams and universities how to apply NeuFit with their patients and athletes to help them recover faster from injury and optimize performance. So, Garrett, why is it so important to focus on the nervous system for treating pain?
That's a fabulous question, and ultimately, working with the nervous system allows us to truly get to the source, because pain is a signal from the nervous system, specifically from the brain. And so pain is not experienced in the body, it's actually experienced in the brain. And when someone says to you, James, oh, well, you have back pain, it's all in your head, you can say, you're right, it's all in my head. Pain is always in the head, or specifically in the brain of the person who's experiencing it. And so we get so enamored with the oh, it hurts here, therefore something is broken here and I have to fix it here, or wherever it is on the body. And in reality, we know that pain is an action signal from the brain. Pain is the brain's way of saying that whatever's happening right now is threatening. And it's the brain's signal to stop doing that, or change direction, or do something different to avoid that threat. And sometimes the threat is physical. Sometimes it hurts here because something is broken here, and something's damaged, and our brain actually legitimately wants us to stay away from that. But sometimes our brains are actually reacting to threats that are non-physical. So I mentioned, there's the psycho-emotional aspect of pain, and we can't completely divorce that from this conversation, because sometimes we experience pain because of job pressures. I mean, think how many people are out of work, or their livelihood is threatened right now. That is actually, beyond just a paycheck, that's relevant to survival, because if I can't get enough money to pay rent and feed my family, that legitimately threatens my survival. And so that taps into those same brain mechanisms, these almost reptilian survival-based brain mechanisms, where we're always monitoring our environment and our surroundings for possible threats, and constantly passing millions of bits of information through this filter, through the amygdala, for example, that's looking at everything. Is this anything I have to address, or is it something I should be afraid of? Is it something that's threatening to my survival? And so our brains are constantly monitoring the environment for threat, and sometimes those threats are non-physical. And there's a really interesting body of research, when you mentioned back pain here, that I just have to mention, which is there was initial studies were done within a large corporation, where they were concerned that a large part of their workforce were missing days of work because of low back pain. And so they tried to figure out what it was that was causing this. Was it the ergonomics of their chair? Was it not getting up and walking for a few minutes every hour? Like, was it being too sedentary, or was it not stretching certain muscles, or was it having being predisposed to back pain because they were overweight? They looked at all these things, and guess what they found out was the number one cause?
It was all in the head.
It was job dissatisfaction.
Yeah, there you go. It was all in their head. It was job dissatisfaction.
It was, yeah.
Well, I tell you what, that must mean that I'm dissatisfied with my job, because I have low back pain. I'm actually not dissatisfied with my job. I actually love what I do. I own a couple of businesses, and I love that. And I still have back pain. So there must be some kind of emotional issue that's going on that's causing me to have continuous lower back pain. I've actually got this little device here that I've got between me and the back of the chair at the moment, which is alleviating some of the pressure on my lower back. And then sometimes when I sit in a car, or actually almost always when I'm driving a car, the way that if the car that I'm driving doesn't have one of those chairs where you can kind of change the degrees of actually the seat and the degrees of the back, other than just like, you pull a lever and you can move closer to the steering wheel, and you can move the backrest back, but you can't actually move the seat down or up. If it's something like that, I experience tremendous back pain, because it puts a lot of pressure on my lower back. If I'm driving someone else's car, or a rent-a-car, for example, and I can change the seat height or the seat angle a little bit, I can actually alleviate a lot of that pain. Hello, Connie from Hoboken, Stephen from Sacramento. If you guys have got a question for Garrett, please do post your question in here right now and ask Garrett. Garrett and I have met in person at Paleo FX in Austin, Texas, where he puts his device up to my. It was my foot the first year, then it was my knee the next year. Garrett, you might recall, and we're talking about reducing pain in the body using, I guess, what Garrett would describe as neuroscience, right? Is that how you would describe it?
Absolutely, yes, yes. And if anytime we're talking about pain, we absolutely have to talk about the nervous system, because that is what gives us the experience of pain.
Yeah. So what can people do besides being satisfied with their job, becoming more satisfied with their job, or quitting their job and getting one that they are satisfied with? What else can they do to reduce pain from sitting at desks for long hours, for example? I think you're standing up at the moment. I'm waiting on my stand-up desk to arrive any week now, and then I'm going to be standing almost all the time. But at the moment, I am sitting in a chair. So what can people do if they experience, for example, back pain, from sitting at desks for long hours?
That's a great question, because it is common to have back pain, even if one is, as you are, satisfied with their job. And so, unfortunately, it's not always that easy. That's where we have to do some fact finding. Another common cause, like you talk about, if you're in the car and you're driving for an extended period of time, sometimes the back will hurt unless you can move or have the seat positioned a certain way. And so, if you're not moving, like a lot of times people are stiff in the morning or after a long car trip, if you're not moving, you're actually missing out on all of the signals of movement, all these neurological inputs that happen when we move. We should be sending inputs from the core of the body when we're moving, and if we're missing out on those, the brain starts to get a little fuzzy. Believe it or not, it doesn't actually see as clearly where the torso and the lower back are in space and how those joints are moving and how they're relating to each other. And so it will, as a protective mechanism, stiffen up. So a lot of times when we're stiff, when we think, oh man, I should be more flexible than this, but I'm not, I'm so stiff. A lot of times that's a protective mechanism imposed by the brain and nervous system. And it is very similar to pain, because it's a response to threat. It's a protective strategy. And so pain and stiffness often go hand in hand. And a way to help with both back pain and with stiffness is to move, of course. And we're gonna think about moving in a very strategic way, where with the lower back, we have these vertebrae, the L1 through 5, the vertebrae stacked on top of each other to make that spinal column. And we have to make sure that we actually move that column. So I'll just lower my screen a little bit.
And while you do that, I'm actually going to stand up.
Good.
So it's going to be more of a peculiar angle, but I'm just going to stand.
So one great movement you can do for your lower back, and this is one that I absolutely love and do often and would recommend, is stand with your hands on your hips, and you're going to try to keep your pelvis still. So the hips aren't going to move. The movement is going to be in the lumbar spine, and we're going to do a big circle like this. So imagine that you had a flashlight coming out of the top of your head, and you were tracing a circle on the ceiling. Or like you're just making a big, tracing out a big circle with your shoulders and your torso. So we're getting some in the front here, that's flexion, bending forward. We're getting some side bending, some extension going to the back, and some side bending to the other side. So doing literally my takeaway would be to get up ideally every hour, and just do 5 to 10 of these in both directions.
Yeah,
that's the best case scenario. At least a couple times a day is second best, but it doesn't take much, 5 to 10 reps in there just to create some, get some movement in those joints. You have all these wonderful neurological receptors, all these sensors there in between the joints. And when you don't move them, they just kind of, they get dull. They don't, the pathways go dormant. And so stimulating those sends this barrage of input. And so your brain's able to take off. It says, oh, okay, the back is there. It's doing this. There's not as much need to protect and stiffen. It'll let you move more and just be more fluid and loose.
Yeah, it's kind of like use it or lose it, right? So it's like use your spine, use your hips, or lose the mobility and the strength in it.
Exactly.
So it's the same with muscles, right? It's like use the muscle or you'll lose the muscle,
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And a lot of times, we know more and probably think and speak more about muscles because, we see them, and a lot of times our kind of body image or our perception of how healthy we are is based on our muscles. And so we often look at those and joints, but doing joint focused movements are profoundly important for healthy movement and for helping us maintain our movement, particularly as we get older. And they're also very important for this, for avoiding injury, for reducing or eliminating pain. And that's part of that is because, if you move a muscle, there's some nerves in the muscle, but if you move a joint, there's so many more nerves in that joint. So you get all this beautiful, wonderful neurological input when you do that. And so that's how the brain, our brains are this master control system of the body. And we need to have that information, that input going up into the brain so that it can make better decisions and can, control everything in the most optimal way possible.
We've got someone who's watching us live on Facebook at the moment. Brad LaCroix says, so true, Garrett. Great stuff. Totally agree, with a thumbs up. We have Stephen who's saying, interesting. My wife's back has been bothering her and she's very stressed and dissatisfied with her job.
There you go.
So if you start experiencing lower back pain, it's a sign that you've got to get out of your job, get into a new one, do something different. If you're just joining us, go ahead and leave a comment or ask a question of Garrett here. We're going to be talking about overcoming pain, overcoming injury. Garrett is the founder and CEO of NeuFit, and he is known as the health engineer. And he's taken his training in engineering and neuroscience and used it to create NeuFit and his NEUBIE device, which we're going to be asking about or talking about in a second. Just for now, why don't you just go ahead and describe what the NeuFit method is? Like, just how does it work, and how can people try this NeuFit, and how is it different from, say, other modalities?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we often work with people who are trying to recover from pain and injury. We're trying to recover from surgery, as I mentioned at the beginning here, and we're able to help them by addressing the real impediments that stand in the way of efficient healing. Because if you're injured, James, if you're injured because your lower back is actually damaged or irritated, or if you fall and twist your ankle or whatever it is, the issue is not necessarily the initial insult or trauma, but how the body responds to that trauma. And what I mean by that specifically is that after you roll your ankle, for example, your muscles all stiffen and contract around there in order to protect. It's that same survival-based protective mechanism, that we talked about earlier. And that's productive if someone tries to attack that ankle tissue again and tries to force you into rolling your ankle again in that moment. But it's actually counterproductive for healing, for movement, and in many ways, that response actually stands in the way of the healing process. The body literally blocks its own or impedes its own healing process. And it's, in some ways, it's just as simple as that excessive tension there where the body's trying to lock down that area. That tension literally reduces the flow of blood and blocks the flow of nutrients and raw materials that the body needs in order to help heal that tissue that was damaged. And so what we're able to do for example, in this case, is scan around on the body. And if it was your ankle, James, we'd be able to scan around on your foot, scan on your leg, and tell you exactly where those protective patterns are present in your nervous system, where your nervous system is telling those muscles to guard and protect and brace. And once we find those areas, then we're able to use this unique direct current to help give the neurological impulses to re-educate those areas, break through that protective pattern, and take the tissue that where everything was really protected and contracted, open it up so that now, for instance, more blood flow can get in there, and it can bring the nutrients and the raw materials. And it's amazing when that happens, that the body still is doing the healing. It's not like we're doing the healing. It's that patient's body is doing the healing, and it can do it in an incredibly fast, seemingly miraculous time frame. And when we get those impediments out of the way, and that process is able to move at its natural rate, the results do sometimes seem miraculous. Where we'll work with on the ankle sprain example. Here in Texas, high school football is a big deal. Friday Night Lights, they're playing the games there, and every season we'll have a few high school football players who will have an ankle sprain in that Friday night game. They think they're supposed to be out 3 to 4 weeks, and they'll come and see us. They'll do maybe 2 or 3 sessions a day, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then they're back on the practice field Tuesday, Wednesday. They play that Friday. They don't miss a game, and they're blown away at how much faster they recovered. And that's because of how we're able to help them manage the response to the injury. Again, not so much the injury itself as much as it is the response to it.
So just we've got a couple questions that are coming through here. We've got Connie on YouTube is asking, what's your perspective on the research that says emotional I think what you might mean is pain here. It says emotional pain actually causes the same feeling as physical pain, and if you agree, how do you treat it? So what's your perspective on research that says emotional pain actually causes physical pain, and how would you treat that?
That's a fabulous question. Thank you. If it was Connie, I think I heard the name, but thank you so much.
Connie, who's watching live on YouTube.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because that is a fascinating discussion topic. And this is a really important concept if we're going to help people with pain, because oftentimes their pain is due to more psychological or emotional factors. And it's, something might have gotten hurt in the past, and yet the pain lingers on long after that original injury is healed, or it's been gone for a while and it comes back, and it, seemingly because of some sort of emotional trigger. And it's very, very interesting that the way we respond to emotional threats is very similar to the way that we respond to physical threats. So if James were going to attack me here, I might kind of startle, and I might brace myself, and I'll probably, kind of close my body in the sense that I'm going to bring the bones of my arms in front of my more vulnerable organs. I'm going to try to protect my face, try to protect my visceral organs. I'm going to kind of curl up and close in this flexion dominant position. And even if he's not coming at me physically, but if something emotionally challenging or threatening is happening to me, my body will actually adopt to some degree that same type of position. I'll brace as if something's coming at me physically, even if it's just an emotional threat or something that quote unquote should not hurt, or that we think would not hurt. And so there is, whenever we experience emotional and psychological stress or trauma, there is a physical correlate. There's a location wherein we actually brace, or where we hold that trauma, is what some people might say. And so one of the coolest parts of this process is that when we scan around on the body, we find wherever the body's bracing or protecting or responding as if there's threat. And so it's possible to even be able to pick up threat that's due to, or protection that's due to non-physical threats. So in the physical body, it's still possible to pick up areas of threat that's due to non-physical causes, and you still want to work on it in the same type of way. I mean, we're talking physically here, so we're not doing counseling, and we're not necessarily talking to people or processing the trauma in that cognitive way. However, doing this type of work, it's common that we work with people who experience either reliving some sort of injury or trauma, or have emotions come up as they're doing this. And again, I'm not trained as a psychologist or psychiatrist, and so if there was something more serious coming up, we would definitely refer to someone who can handle that. And there are many times that we've observed where people seem to be able to release the emotional burden and feel that sense of lightness and ease by releasing the physical holding and the physical guarding that was associated with that emotional or psychological event. So hopefully that helps you there, Connie.
Dr. Joe Dispenza, who is probably the most, at least at the moment, one of the more famous or well-known, I guess, I don't know how you would describe him? Meditation expert or a neuroscience expert? But he's a very big proponent of people being able to heal physical trauma by healing their emotional trauma. There are stories of people going to his workshops who've got seemingly incurable cancer, and this is a very extreme case, and then spending a week with him and just rewiring the neurons in their brain, they're able to heal themselves. Now again, that's a very extreme case, but if we take this into like a not so extreme case, you can actually persuade your brain or rework your brain to literally overcome sickness, overcome sickness, maybe something like the flu, maybe like a fever, maybe get out of that stress, which is high cortisol, the high fight or flight hormone of cortisol, reduce the cortisol levels, come back into a more calm state, and then the whole body starts to correct itself. And a lot of pain that was showing up in areas of your body somehow almost seemingly miraculously dissipates. So anyway, he seems to be a big proponent of that, and it seems like, in a way, Garrett, what you're doing here with your NEUBIE is that, and your NeuFit method, is that you're actually doing somewhat of a similar kind of exercise, albeit just in a different type of process.
I think so. I think there's a lot of overlap, and I think that's a beautiful description, that the brain and the output of the body is a response to the signals of the environment. And so by changing the environment, you're able to change, at least to some degree, the output of the brain and the body. And by changing, as Dr. Dispenza is talking about, and as you're sharing with that experience, by changing the emotional milieu or the emotional state, that changes the processes that are going on in the brain, changes the outputs. It also certainly, as you mentioned, changes the hormonal environment, and there's serious health consequences to always being in that stressed out fight or flight high cortisol state. So a lot of what we think of as the placebo effect, a lot of those placebo effect results are shown to be due to changes in the autonomic nervous system state, and getting the nervous system to shift into more of that parasympathetic or the rest and digest state, as opposed to the fight or flight state. And that's the state wherein the body, let's talk about the opposite first. The fight or flight state is when the body takes energy and resources away from the digestive and elimination organs and the reproductive organs. It takes energy away from those, because that's about absorbing nutrients to rebuild the body or reproduction. Those are long-term projects, where if we have an immediate survival need, those are not super relevant, right? We need to live to see tomorrow. That's priority number one. And so the body will take energy and resources away from those systems to send it out to the muscles, to the brain, so that we can either fight or flee or think our way out of a challenge. And so creating that shift where you're able to move more into the rest and digest state sends more energy and resources to the organs of digestion, waste elimination, reproduction. It optimizes heart rate and blood pressure, the cardiovascular system. And so being in that state has profound implications. And that's where a lot of the benefits of meditation, that's where some of the benefits of our work come into play, where a lot of the underlying objective is to create that shift into the rest and digest response, so that the body, just like the body has power to heal and rebuild after physical trauma, the body has amazing ability to recover, to fight off disease, to really do wonderful things, to rebuild itself, to detoxify. And so the more energy and resources we can put into the actual organs that perform those tasks, the more our bodies are able to fight off disease, rebuild themselves, and the more vibrant, healthy, energetic, we all are. And so there's a big part of that is the autonomic nervous system, and that's where there's a few different things that happen. One is, stimulating very specific parts of the nervous system can help shift us into that state. So like vagus nerve stimulation, which is something that we do with our device. We have some different techniques that we use to help increase that rest and digest response, for example. And then also the same type of process that we talked about in terms of recovering from injury, and where those protective patterns are happening. If one of those patterns, or many of those patterns, are present in the body, where there's threat, and there's areas of holding on in the body as if trying to brace against a threat, then the brain's constantly in that high alert state. The brain is thinking, oh my gosh, we could get attacked again, or we are under attack right now. And so finding where those patterns are present, you kind of cut off that line of communication. You change the environment, whereas before the brain was getting these signals from the body saying, we're under attack, or this is a time of threat or problems. Now the message is one of, oh, okay, we're relaxed, we're cool, we can handle more, we can handle a challenge if it were to come up, we're good. So you're changing that signal from the environment by sending signals, with a device, or through meditation, or through various techniques.
I'm going to ask you about how the device works. I'll get you to describe it in just a second. But if you're watching here on Facebook or YouTube or some other platform, go ahead and type a question for Garrett right now. Any question around pain, recovery, maybe you have some pain somewhere in your body. Maybe Garrett can help solve that for you, or suggest a form of repair for you. If you have some other issue that you'd like to ask Garrett's advice of, here we go. We've got Rod, who says, I injured my ankle and was told I may not be able to perform again. I love dancing and want to overcome this. Any tips? So Rod injured his ankle, was told he may not be able to perform again, loves dancing, wants to overcome it. Any tips?
Great question, Rod. So first, I have to say I'm not able to give you medical advice. Nothing is meant to diagnose or anything. I am happy to share experiences, or share a perspective based on our experiences, and it will depend. The advice that we can offer, or what we or our team or our people in our network around the country can do for you. It will depend on the severity of the injury, and there's many variables. With that said, this is something that we've heard before, where people think it's either going to be a long time to recover, or they're not going to be able to get back to a certain level. And that's because the common approaches, in physical therapy, orthopedic medicine, everything is so structure-based and tissue-based, and there's not enough emphasis on function, and function is controlled by the nervous system. And it's rare that therapists and doctors actually think about neurological function in the treatment of injuries like this. And so we have been able to help people using the NeuFit method, and what we're talking about here. We have been able to help people who have these types of injuries make significant progress and get back to the point where where they can walk again when they weren't supposed to be able to, or they get back to playing sports when they weren't supposed to be able to. And so I think it's definitely worth trying. If you are interested, what I'd encourage you to do is check out our website. It's neu.fit, neu.fit, and www.neu.fit, and then click on, there's a locations tab at the top of the page, and that'll show you a list of all of the locations, 100 or so around North America right now that are offering NeuFit. And sometimes people have these either really painful or very limiting conditions, and can experience breakthroughs very, very quickly doing this. So I think it's worth trying. Obviously, it's without knowing more details, it's tough to give you a very clear prognosis. But I definitely think it's worth trying. And based on our experiences, there is often a lot of opportunity for improvement when you take this neurological approach, because it's so often ignored in traditional methods, and yet it's super important. It's vitally important because the nervous system controls, almost everything about the body.
Yeah. So just before I ask you to explain how it actually works, or just describe, what you're putting on someone's body and what happens there. I mean, I have experienced this and I can do it, but I'll get you to explain it. Question. RICE, R-I-C-E, RICE, rest, ice, compression, elevation. Let's just say I roll an ankle, my foot starts to blow up, there's lots of swelling. The traditional method is rest, ice, compression, elevation, RICE, right? So rest, it's straight away we grab an ice pack, we stick it on to reduce the swelling. Compression, we put like a bandage around it, we make it nice and tight. And then elevation, we want to make sure that the ankle's above our heart, so that the blood is flowing away from the injury. So what you seem to be suggesting is either in conjunction with that, or no, we're not gonna rest it. We're just gonna start to work on it right away, almost as soon as the injury happens. We're just gonna go to work it. We're gonna start like working the muscles around there, trying to get the repair process going. So how do you, can you just explain that as to, like, does the NeuFit method work in conjunction with doing RICE, or do we have to do RICE for a day or two or a few days first and then we put NeuFit to it? Like, just explain that.
That's a great question, and that is probably the first thing people think of is, oh, I need to ice this and do the whole RICE thing. And so one of the ways that I like to think about this topic is to think back to the caveman days, for example. If an early human sprained his or her ankle, that person is going to be a serious vulnerability for themselves and for their tribe, because if they can't move, if they're sitting there, they can get eaten by a predator. And if their comrades have to carry them, then their whole group moves more slowly, and they're all more vulnerable to being attacked. And so the early human, we have to believe, would have probably tried to walk it off. They would try to move that area, and it would be painful if there's damage there, but they would move through it. They'd probably push through some of that discomfort, and in the process, I believe they would end up healing faster, because they're actually providing mechanical input, mechanical stimulus into those tissues, and creating movement to pump the blood in there to bring the nutrients and the raw materials that they need to rebuild and repair. And they probably, by moving it, would actually stimulate themselves, cause themselves to heal faster. And there's several aspects of this RICE approach that actually impede the healing process. So ice, for example, ice causes vasoconstriction. It reduces the blood going to that area. If you alternate with heat, maybe not a problem, or if you only do a little bit of it, maybe not a problem. But generally, there's no evidence that shows it to actually speed up or improve the recovery process, the use of ice. Rest is interesting because, if we think about it, rest, the body is always responding to the signals and the inputs of the environment. And if we're just sitting around on the couch, at some point, the brain starts to think, oh, this is the new normal, and it starts to downregulate all of the systems of the body. And so the metabolism and the hormones and everything is going to work at a little bit of a lower level. And I mean, does that mean you never take a day off? No, of course not. But there is some point in time where those signals start to downregulate and actually reduce the body's overall healing capacities and capabilities. And so plus, just if you got injured because you have an underlying dysfunction, just sitting around and resting isn't going to fix that underlying dysfunction. So you do have to work to address underlying issues, if there are some, which often there are, especially with non-contact injuries. Compression elevation, there is some use in reducing swelling, but you have to ask whether you necessarily want to reduce swelling, because swelling is the blood plasma pooling in that area, and that's the part of blood that carries, you have the red blood cells that carry oxygen, and the rest of the liquid is the plasma, and that carries, for instance, a lot of the proteins that you need to rebuild and repair that area. So the body is sending that there. And we don't necessarily want to or need to get rid of all of it, because it has some value. It's part of the natural healing process for a reason, because that's part of how the body delivers the raw materials. So I definitely have some issues with that, and we've seen that using our process, for example, can definitely help people recover much faster than they would if they were just following the RICE approach or the more traditional therapy progressions.
So just explain how your device works, and then I've got a question here from Paula Wadeson White and a Brad LaCroix and another member. Paula asks, any hints for healing a frozen shoulder? Just before we get to that, can you just explain, like visually, try to create a picture of how a NeuFit device works?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me grab a prop. One moment.
Okay. And if you are here and you're watching and you have a question, please do post your question down below and ask the question of Garrett Salpeter. Garrett, over to you.
I'll see if I can actually get a device. I think my wife was using it for her workout out in the garage, so I'll see if she can bring it in. Basically, we have one of these electrodes that will be connected to the machine, and we start by scanning around on the body. And what we're doing is basically loading or challenging these areas. So we're getting the signal as if that muscle was actually working, or as if that muscle is actually working, or when we're up here, as if that muscle is actually working. And it allows us to tell a few things very quickly. We can tell, first of all, which muscles are up to the challenge, because they're able to process that signal, and the brain just says, oh yeah, that's no big deal. That's well within the current capacity of those tissues. There's no reason to protect, or that's not threatening at all. And so it feels kind of pleasant. And then when we, hang on one second. Hey, can you bring me?
Seems like Garrett's going to get an actual device for us here, and we're going to be watching. Go ahead.
So as we do that scan, we can tell, the areas where things were working well, the brain doesn't have to fight against it at all. It actually feels kind of pleasant, like a nice tingle. And then if we find areas where there is a problem, for instance, if I go to this arm and I scan over an area where that either the body's been protecting because there was trauma there, and that's part of those kind of maladaptive responses that we were talking about earlier, where the body's protecting and bracing and getting in the way of its own healing process, or an area where the body's been holding, protecting because of emotional traumas like we talked about, or it's an area that's been underused because of bad habits or previous injuries. If we stimulate an area like that, then the signal to the brain is, whoa, hey, we're loading an area that doesn't really like that area that hasn't been working at that level in a long time. There's something new, something different, something threatening. And so, thank you. And so the brain actually responds where it's threatening. And so the brain triggers this alarm. This, by the way, is what the machine looks like, or at least the old prototype version. This is the one that we keep at home. And we've been sending out a bunch of these for people during COVID, doing home health and stuff like that. But that's what it looks like. So when we find one of these areas where there's some sort of, it's threatening for whatever reason, because of disuse or because of those protective patterns, then the brain sees that signal and it triggers one of those alarm reactions. That's that same type of protective reaction we talked about, that is very, very similar to, or even equivalent to the messaging with pain. And so we can find where those threats are neurologically, and then teach the body, stimulate those areas to downregulate those threats, or inoculate against those threats is another good way of saying it, to actually change the function and break through those barriers where the body would be standing in the way of its own process. We can open up the floodgates to allow healing to happen. And so you'll actually be if we found a spot there, if we found a spot right there, for example, we'd actually stimulate that area with the same machine while doing different movements, and very quickly and efficiently retrain the muscles, the tissues, and really the underlying neurological patterns that control everything in that area.
Yeah, great. And I recall doing it at Paleo FX conference in Austin, Texas, and you hooked me up to your machine, and it was like a pulsing sensation, if I recall correctly. And what's that sensation? What am I feeling when the pulsing is going through my around the area of my injury?
So it's a pulsed direct current, and that's an important piece that's worth touching on for a moment, because virtually everything else that's out there in the world of electrical currents, electrical stimulation for the body, virtually all of it is alternating current, and that has some issues and limitations, particularly when you're talking about neuromuscular reeducation and how the nervous system controls the muscles, because as that alternating current, as that signal volleys back and forth, you end up causing muscles to co-contract and fight against each other. You train the body to stiffen and resist its own movements. And so when it's up at a high enough level to make a difference, you end up training the body to move as if you were driving a car, hitting the throttle and the brake pedal at the same time. And you can imagine that's very inefficient, possibly even sets the body up for injury. Whereas with this direct current signal, it actually mimics the directionality and the impulses within the nervous system. And so it allows us to tap into the nervous system, both in that scanning and that assessment process, and also in the treatment process, to tap into the nervous system in very powerful, significant ways so that we can make changes very quickly. So what it is, it's a direct current, and it's stimulating all the different sensory receptors. And so you'll feel some of the skin receptors, you'll feel some buzzing, and only if there's issues will you feel those deep, cramps or those painful sensations, which are, like trigger points would be the best kind of thing to describe. And as you work through it, it tends to relax the tissue and starts to feel more pleasant, and just becomes a nice buzz again. So that's what we're shooting for, is that nice buzz.
Wonderful. So let's answer a few questions here. We had Paula, any hints for healing a frozen shoulder? And then we'll go to Brad, who asks, Garrett, have you worked with anybody that has cerebral palsy and septo-optic dysplasia? My niece's daughter, who is 2 years old, has these too. Connie asks on YouTube, can you help explain how your device is different than a stim machine that you would get in PT? So let's just handle in that order. Paula's question first. Any hints for healing a frozen shoulder?
Great question, Paula. If you're dealing with that, I know it can be frustrating, and I definitely feel compassion for you. Frozen shoulder is it's very interesting, and I think the best way, or the best kind of perspective for addressing it, is to think about injuries and problems like this in two components. There's a functional component, and there's a structural component, and it's called adhesive capsulitis. So if there is truly a problem in the structural component, and it is the shoulder capsule, then I don't know which one I use, because I see myself on here and I'm flipped. So the structural component sometimes can be, there can be so much structural damage or trauma that is the limiting factor, and you have to wait for that to heal or unfreeze. However, there are a lot of times where the functional component really is the problem, where a large part of the frozen shoulder is really the brain and nervous system trying to protect and lock down the arm so that you don't move that shoulder, because the brain perceives that as threatening, either because of a previous injury or because of any sort of threat. The times where we've seen breakthroughs are times where it has been more of that functional piece, where we've worked with people who have had frozen shoulder for 6 months and couldn't lift their arm past here. And in a couple sessions, by breaking through that neurological protective response, we've been able to see them get all the way up to here. in just a few sessions, seemingly miraculous. We know it's an impossibly short period of time for the structure to change. So we know it was a functional change, and we know that they had that range of motion available to them. They were just blocking themselves from actually expressing it. The brain was actively imposing the limitation, putting on the brakes, so to speak, in order to keep them there, because the brain thought it was unsafe. It was afraid that they might get injured if they went past that certain point. And so oftentimes that functional approach can lead to breakthroughs that are significant and happen very quickly. Sometimes there are cases where the structural component is so significant that the structural damage or changes to that joint capsule are so significant that it is just going to be a much slower process. And so we don't necessarily know which category you fall into until we get to go through some of our tests and actually try some of the treatment. However, I would definitely, based on the results that we've seen, I would encourage you, if you can, to find a NeuFit practitioner. Check out www.neu.fit, and then go to the locations tab and see if there happens to be someone near you to try out a session, because yeah, there are enough times where we've seen these breakthroughs that I think it's definitely worth trying, and it's non-invasive, very low risk. So yeah, again, I think worth trying.
Garrett asks, have you worked with anybody that has cerebral palsy and septo-optic dysplasia? Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. My niece's daughter, who is 2 years old, has these two.
Thank you, Brad, for the question. I know that can be challenging as well. We have a fairly significant experience with people who have CP, cerebral palsy, children, and even some adults also. And so that is one where I do feel confident in recommending trying NeuFit. I don't personally have any experience with the septo-optic dysplasia. I'd be happy to ask around, and if there's a place where we can post something, or see if anyone in our network has experience with that. In terms of CP, there's some very interesting findings that we've had. For instance, one child that we worked with who was, I think, 8 years old at the time, because of the muscle tension related to CP, she was a toe walker. So I don't know if you can see right now, but I'm standing up on my tippy toes, and maybe I'll just show you with my hands. So she would always walk on her toes. And in one session, we had the machine on her, had the NEUBIE stimulating her, and she was able, for the first time, to actually get her heels down as she walked normally, and it was profound. I mean, her mother's jaw dropped, and it was really powerful. And it took, when we took the machine off that day, she went back to toe walking, and it took many sessions, like 15 to 20 over a period of a few months, in order to change the pattern to where she was walking much more normally, unconsciously, without thinking about it, to make real kind of lasting changes in her gait. And we've seen similar improvements with an adult CP patient who we're working with at our home office here in Austin, for example. He had this flexion position, and now after a few months with us, on command, for the first time, can extend his wrist to neutral, even a little past neutral, has much better dexterity and control of his fingers. His penmanship is significantly improved. His writing was extremely sloppy and barely legible, and now it's much smoother, much more legible. So we've seen some cool things in that area, and a large part of what we believe to be happening is really neuroplasticity. We're tapping into the body's capacity for neuroplasticity. The nervous system, we used to think it was hardwired or fixed and static. Now we know it can change and adapt to our environment and our experiences. And one of the keys is that it just takes a lot of input. It takes a lot of stimulation to stimulate the nervous system to actually change and adapt. And so, for patients recovering from stroke, for example, it can take hundreds of thousands of repetitions to regain movements. It's like the equivalent of, if James was training to be an Olympic athlete. I know he used to used to work for ESPN and talk about the Olympic athletes at least. But when you're thinking about someone who trains for hours a day, every day for years, that's the amount of work that it takes to tap into this capacity for neuroplasticity and make changes. And that's because you need to have this dose of neurological input, and using technology like ours, you can get that dose much more efficiently and safely and effectively. And so, instead of 4 years, maybe you can shorten it to 2. It's still a long time, but it's much shorter and more efficient, and you see more tangible progress more quickly along the way.
Got a question here from Edgar who says, sorry, actually, let's do Connie's first. Can you help explain how your device is different from a stim machine that you would get in PT? And then we'll go to Edgar's question about running.
Yeah, great question, Connie. So the biggest difference has to do with this distinction between alternating current and direct current. And I don't know if you were on for that piece of the conversation. The biggest difference is the effect on the nervous system, the neuromuscular system specifically. And the alternating current devices cause a lot of muscle contraction as the signals alternate. And really the limiting factor is that muscle contraction, whereas there's less of that happening with our device. And you may wonder, well, is that good or is that bad? Like, I think I want to get the muscles working. And the reason that we want this, and the reason that it's beneficial, is that when we can bypass, at least to some degree, all that muscle contraction, we can actually communicate with the nerves and the nervous system in a much more powerful and meaningful way. And so some of it is in the technology, some of the difference is in the device itself, and then some of it is in the methods that we use for applying it, with the various assessments and the whole system and process. And so if you can, I'd encourage you to work with a NeuFit practitioner near you. We also, I don't know if any doctors or therapists are on the call, we do train and certify other professionals, and we have about 100 or a little more physical therapy, chiropractic, integrative medicine clinics around the country that are using the NEUBIE, and a handful of pro sports teams and some major universities and their athletic departments and places like that. So any professionals would certainly love to chat with you about it as well.
Edgar's asking, I go for a run maybe once or twice only a week. A day after jogging, my legs are really sore. Anything which I can do to ease the pain?
Great question. So soreness is interesting. Soreness is typically the result of inflammation, and when you're training in the gym or you're jogging like you're doing here, your muscles, to some degree, they kind of break down. You challenge the muscles, and some of those individual muscle fibers have micro trauma. They tear a little bit, and the body responds with inflammation. It sends inflammation there to pick up some of the damage and to guide the regrowth and repair process. And so if the soreness is in your muscles, to some degree, you may want to consider letting it run its course, because that's part of the body's process of remodeling and rebuilding and reinforcing its own structures so that they're better equipped to handle that same activity or challenge next time. So they actually come back stronger so they can handle that again in the future. And there's evidence that shows, for example, that taking anti-inflammatories, like if you take Advil or aspirin, something like that, it could help reduce or eliminate the soreness, but it does so at a cost, because you're going to actually reduce or cut off protein synthesis. You're going to block, by blocking inflammation, you're blocking the body's ability to rebuild and remodel those tissues. So I want to recommend at least considering that you may want to let that run its course. If the soreness is in your joints, that's an important distinction. So soreness in the muscles, we may want to consider letting it run its course. Soreness in the joints is typically a problem. That means that your muscles are not supporting and stabilizing you as effectively as they probably should, and you're collapsing into the tendons or ligaments or cartilage or discs or other joint structures. And so that's usually a sign that something is off in your movement, and it would be worth working with a NeuFit professional or a skilled and qualified physical therapist or chiropractor, someone who can help you figure out where these underlying movement challenges are. So that's the biggest distinction I would make is whether it's muscle or joint soreness. And if it is muscle soreness and you do want to or need to reduce it, instead of anti-inflammatories, I would try doing things that can actually accelerate your recovery. So try low-level movement like active recovery, which could be some mobility drills, or walking, things like that. They're going to get blood flow and get the help pump out some of that inflammation, but not too much, so it'll still be able to do its thing. Contrast therapy, like doing cryotherapy, doing infrared saunas, things like that can be helpful. Certain breathing exercises can help aid with recovery, increased recovery. We would actually use our device at a lighter setting to help increase blood flow and lengthen out and relax some of the muscles and other tissues there. And that usually helps people reduce the soreness, have a greater sense of ease with movement. So hopefully that helps.
Just a final question here, just as we wrap this up, Garrett. Paula asked, any way to be tested in Australia? So maybe this is just a good way for you to wrap it up and just let people know where they can go and use the NeuFit and where they can get more information.
Yes. Thank you, Paula, for the question. We actually have our first facility in Australia just is starting to offer NeuFit this summer, or well, summer here. So in the next 60 days, someone will have it down there. So we will, I believe, have a listing on the website. And if you're able to go to our website or follow us on social media, we will certainly announce that and add it to our listing. So the best place to find out listings is neu.fit, www.neu.fit. Go to the homepage there, click the locations tab. You'll find all the locations in North America that are currently offering NeuFit, and within 60 days or so, also Australia. And then if you are a professional, and this might be able to help your rehab or integrative medical practice, check out neu.fit/stimulus package. Little play on words. The government stimulus and also the electrical stimulus. We got some special discounts running on right now. If you're interested in learning more about adding this to your business or your practice, also deals for if any individuals are interested in getting their own device for rehab or training.
Wonderful. Well, Garrett, thank you so much. You've actually inspired me to be more mobile and move around. As I'm recording this, I started sitting on my chair, and then subsequently I've now got my foot, my leg up, my knee up on my desk, and I'm moving around, and I'm changing it around to here, moving this way, and I've been doing a few little stretches. So I've been using it, not losing it.
Amen, so brother. Amen.
Thank you for the inspiration, and thank you for your words of wisdom and for explaining everything to do with pain and neuroscience and your NeuFit method. I really appreciate that. You're in Austin, Texas. I'm in Brisbane, Australia. It's kind of cool to be able to connect with you on different parts of the globe. And yeah, thank you so much for your experience and your wisdom today.
Awesome. You're so welcome, and thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on here. Good to catch up with you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be catching up at a conference anytime soon somehow, Garrett, but whenever that is, at some date in the future when COVID-19 has ended, and I will love to see you again in person.
Amen. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks so much, Garrett. Take care, mate.
You too.